The morning sun filtered through the cracked blinds of a small house on Maple Street in Cedar Falls, Iowa. The paint on the wooden walls had long since faded, peeling away like memories slipping from an aging mind. The porch sagged under years of neglect, and the roof showed patches where shingles had surrendered to countless storms. Inside, 78-year-old Eleanor Mitchell sat at her kitchen table, her arthritic fingers wrapped around a chipped coffee mug that had seen better days, much like everything else in her life. Eleanor had been a teacher for 42 years at Cedar Falls Elementary School. She had taught 3 generations of children in this small Midwestern town, watching them grow from wide-eyed first graders into adults with families of their own. Now, in the twilight of her years, she lived alone in the house her late husband Harold had built with his own hands back in 1963. Harold had been gone for 11 years now, and with each passing season, the house seemed to miss him more than she did. The kitchen faucet dripped with a steady rhythm that had become her only companion during the long, silent mornings. Eleanor could not afford to fix it. Her teacher's pension barely covered her medications and groceries, and the property taxes had risen every year while her income remained frozen in time. She had thought about selling the house, but where would she go? This was the only home she had ever known as an adult, the place where she had raised her daughter Sarah, who now lived 3 states away and rarely called. Eleanor pushed herself up from the table, her joints protesting with familiar aches. She walked to the window and looked out at her overgrown front yard. The grass had grown wild because she could no longer push the mower, and the flower beds that had once been her pride were now choked with weeds. She remembered how Harold used to tend to those roses every Sunday morning, whistling old hymns while he worked. Now the rose bushes were just thorny skeletons reaching toward a sky that seemed perpetually gray. A neighbor's dog barked somewhere down the street, and Eleanor caught sight of Mrs. Patterson walking briskly past her house, eyes fixed straight ahead, as if the Mitchell residence had become invisible. It was not the first time Eleanor had noticed this. The neighbors had grown distant over the years, perhaps embarrassed by the declining state of her property, or perhaps simply too busy with their own lives to notice an old woman fading away behind crumbling walls. The truth was, Eleanor had stopped asking for help years ago. Pride, perhaps, or maybe just the exhaustion of explaining her situation over and over to people who nodded sympathetically but never followed through. The church had sent volunteers once about 5 years back, but they had only stayed for an afternoon and never returned. The local handyman had given her an estimate for the roof repair that made her eyes water, not from the wind, but from the impossibility of ever affording such a sum. She shuffled back to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. Half a carton of milk, some eggs, a wilting head of lettuce. She would need to make a trip to the grocery store soon, but that required calling the senior transport service and waiting for hours, then navigating the aisles with her walker while young people rushed past her as if she were an obstacle rather than a person. Eleanor closed the refrigerator door and leaned against it, feeling the weight of her years pressing down on her shoulders like an invisible burden. In the living room, the walls were covered with photographs. Decades of school pictures, class after class of smiling children who had once sat in her classroom and learned to read, to write, to believe in themselves. She had kept every thank you card, every hand-drawn picture, every note from a grateful parent. They filled boxes in the attic and drawers in every room. She had been loved once, celebrated even. The town had thrown her a retirement party that filled the school gymnasium. They had given her a plaque that still hung above the fireplace, gathering dust like everything else. But that was 15 years ago. The children she had taught were now adults with children of their own, and life had carried them in different directions. Some had moved away, others had simply forgotten. Eleanor did not blame them. She understood how life worked, how the present always seemed more urgent than the past, how responsibilities piled up until there was no room left for sentimentality. She had taught them to move forward, after all. She just had not anticipated how lonely it would be to watch them go. The house creaked around her, settling into its decay with the resignation of something that had accepted its fate. Eleanor made her way to the bathroom, gripping the walls for support. The tiles were cracked, and the grout had turned gray with mold she could never quite scrub away. The mirror showed her reflection, and she paused for a moment, studying the face that stared back. Where had the years gone? She could still remember being young, being full of energy and hope, standing in front of her first classroom with butterflies in her stomach and dreams in her heart. Now her hair was thin and white, her skin paper-thin and marked with age spots, her eyes clouded with the beginnings of cataracts. She was becoming a ghost in her own home, transparent and easily forgotten. And yet, somewhere deep inside, the spirit that had inspired thousands of children still flickered, waiting for something, though she could not say what. Eleanor did not know it yet, but her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. At that very moment, on the other side of town, a convoy of motorcycles was gathering outside a bar called the Iron Horse. Their leather vests bore patches and insignias that would have frightened most people in Cedar Falls, but these were not ordinary bikers. They were members of the Thunder Brotherhood, a motorcycle club that had been part of this community for over 3 decades, and they had just learned something about Eleanor Mitchell that would set everything in motion. But we will get to that. First, you need to understand who these men were, and why an old teacher they had never met was about to become the most important person in their world. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel, because the stories we tell here are not just entertainment. They are proof that kindness still exists, that courage still matters, and that sometimes the people who look the toughest are the ones with the biggest hearts. Subscribe now so you do not miss what happens next. Marcus Thompson wiped down the bar at the Iron Horse with a rag that had seen better days. The morning light streamed through the dirty windows, illuminating the dust particles that floated in the air like tiny witnesses to the passage of time. The bar would not open for another few hours, but the Thunder Brotherhood had gathered early for a meeting that had nothing to do with club business in the traditional sense. At 63 years old, Marcus was the president of the Thunder Brotherhood and had been for the past 20 years. His gray beard reached his chest, and his arms were covered in tattoos that told stories of a life lived hard but lived honestly. He had served 2 tours in Vietnam as a young man, came home broken in ways that did not show on the outside, and found his salvation in the brotherhood of fellow veterans who had formed this club back in 1985. The Thunder Brotherhood was not what people thought when they heard the words motorcycle club. Yes, they wore leather and rode Harleys and looked intimidating enough to make pedestrians cross the street. But their real mission was one of service. They organized charity rides for children's hospitals, escorted funeral processions for fallen veterans, stood guard at memorials, and provided security at community events. They were warriors who had found a way to channel their strength into protection rather than destruction. Sitting around the bar were the core members of the club. There was Danny Reeves, the vice president, a former Army Ranger who ran an auto repair shop on the edge of town. His massive frame and scarred knuckles might have suggested violence, but those same hands had built playgrounds for underprivileged schools and fixed cars for single mothers who could not afford repairs. Next to him sat Carlos Mendez, the club's secretary, who had lost his left leg below the knee in Iraq and now walked with a prosthetic that he decorated with an American flag pattern. He worked as a counselor at the Veterans Administration Center, helping other soldiers transition back to civilian life. There was also Thomas Little Bear, a Lakota man from South Dakota who had joined the club after serving in Afghanistan. He rarely spoke, but when he did, everyone listened. He worked as a carpenter, and his hands could create beauty from raw wood in ways that seemed almost mystical. Beside him was Jake Morrison, the youngest of the group at 41, a former Navy SEAL who now taught self-defense classes to at-risk youth at the community center. And finally, there was old Samuel Wright, at 75 the eldest member of the club, a Korean War veteran who had seen things that still visited him in his dreams, but who greeted every morning with gratitude for another day above ground. Marcus looked around at his brothers, these men who had been through hell together and apart, who understood that true strength was not about intimidation, but about using whatever power you had to help those who could not help themselves. He cleared his throat, and the quiet conversations died down immediately. "I got a call last night," Marcus began, his voice carrying the weight of what he was about to share. "Some of you know Jake's sister Jessica works at the county tax office. She told Jake something that has been keeping me up all night." Jake leaned forward, his jaw tight. "Go ahead, Marcus. Tell them what you told me." Marcus nodded slowly. "There is a woman on Maple Street, Eleanor Mitchell, 78 years old. Used to be a teacher at the elementary school. She has been living alone in a house that is falling apart around her. The roof is about to cave in, the plumbing does not work right, the heating system is barely functional. Winter is coming, and Jessica says the property is about to go into foreclosure because Eleanor cannot pay her taxes and keep up with repairs at the same time. Danny frowned deeply. Why has nobody helped her? Does she not have family? One daughter, Jake answered, lives in California. Jessica says she has not visited in years, does not even call much anymore. Eleanor is basically alone. Carlos shook his head, his eyes darkening. 42 years she taught children in this town. 42 years. And now she is going to lose her home because nobody remembers? Samuel Wright spoke up, his voice carrying the rasp of age. I remember Eleanor Mitchell. He paused, and every eye turned to him. She taught my granddaughter back in the 90s. Kimberly had a learning disability, and the school wanted to put her in special education, separate her from the other kids. Eleanor fought for her, spent hours after school working with her, refused to give up. Kimberly graduated with honors, went on to college, became a nurse. She saves lives now because Eleanor Mitchell believed in her when nobody else did. The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. Marcus let it settle before continuing. I did some asking around last night. Called some people who grew up in this town. Samuel's not the only one with a story like that. Turns out Eleanor Mitchell changed a lot of lives. She helped kids who were struggling, stayed late, bought school supplies with her own money, visited sick students at home. She was the kind of teacher who actually cared, who saw every child as important. Thomas Little Bear spoke for the first time. So what are we going to do about it? Marcus looked around the room, meeting each man's eyes in turn. What we always do, brothers. We're going to ride, but not to make noise, not to show off. We're going to ride to Maple Street, and we're going to fix that woman's house. Every last thing that needs fixing, we are going to take care of it. I already talked to Danny about materials. His shop can donate some of what we need, and I have been making calls to suppliers who owe us favors. Thomas, you are the best carpenter in the county. Jake, you know electrical. Carlos knows plumbing from his father's business. We have got the skills, we have got the people, and most importantly, we have got the heart. Danny nodded slowly. When do we start? This Saturday. We show up at dawn, and we do not leave until the job is done. However long it takes, however many weekends we need. That woman gave her life to this community, and we are going to make sure she knows she has not been forgotten. Carlos raised his coffee mug. For Eleanor. The others raised their mugs in unison. For Eleanor. But there was more to this mission than any of them knew yet. Marcus had not shared everything Jessica had told him. There was a reason this felt so personal, a connection that reached back decades into the history of this town and this club. A connection that would come to light soon enough, and when it did, it would change everything they thought they knew about fate and gratitude and the mysterious ways that kindness circles back through time. For now, they had work to do. Plans to make, materials to gather, schedules to coordinate. By the time the meeting ended, each man had his assignment, and the operation to save Eleanor Mitchell's home was officially underway. What they did not know was that Eleanor was at that very moment sitting in her falling-apart kitchen, praying for something she was too proud to name. A miracle, perhaps. Or maybe just a sign that she had not been completely forgotten by the world she had given so much to. Sometimes prayers are answered in the most unexpected ways. Sometimes the angels wear leather. Saturday morning arrived cold and gray, with a thin mist hanging over Cedar Falls like a veil between the present and the past. Eleanor woke before dawn as she always did, her body too old to sleep deeply, but too tired to fully rest. She went through her morning routine slowly, carefully, each movement a negotiation with joints that had grown stiff and uncooperative over the years. As she sat down with her instant coffee, something made her pause. There was a sound outside, low and distant, but growing closer. A rumbling that vibrated through the walls of her old house, shaking the window panes in their frames. Eleanor frowned and reached for her glasses, sliding them onto her face with trembling hands. The rumbling grew louder, deeper, until it seemed to fill the entire world. She made her way to the front window, pushing aside the faded curtains to peer outside. What she saw made her grip the windowsill for support, her heart suddenly racing in her chest. Motorcycles. Dozens of them. They were pulling onto her street one after another, their chrome gleaming even in the gray light, their engines creating a symphony of power that she could feel in her bones. They wore leather vests with patches, and their faces were weathered and hard, but they moved with purpose and precision, parking their bikes in an organized formation along the curb in front of her house. Eleanor's first instinct was fear. She had seen motorcycle clubs on television, knew the reputation that preceded them. But as she watched, something strange happened. The bikers dismounted and began unloading trucks that had arrived behind them. She saw lumber and shingles, pipes and wiring, tools of every description. And as they gathered on her front lawn, none of them looked menacing. They looked focused, determined. Some of them were even smiling. A tall man with a gray beard walked up her front path, climbing the sagging porch steps carefully, testing each one before putting his full weight on it. Eleanor backed away from the window, her heart pounding, unsure what to do. The doorbell rang, and then a knock, gentle despite the large hand that delivered it. "Mrs. Mitchell?" The voice was deep, but warm. "My name is Marcus Thompson. I am president of the Thunder Brotherhood Motorcycle Club. We are here to help you." Eleanor stood frozen in her living room, her mind racing. Help? What kind of help? Who had sent them? She did not know these men, had never heard of their club. But something in the voice made her move toward the door, made her reach for the handle with fingers that would not stop shaking. She opened the door a crack, just enough to see the man standing on her porch. He was massive, covered in tattoos, with a beard that would have frightened her under any other circumstances. But his eyes were kind. Genuinely kind in a way that could not be faked. "I am sorry," she said, her voice thin and uncertain, "but I do not understand." "Why are you here?" Marcus smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "May I come in for a moment, ma'am? I promise we are not here to cause trouble. We are here because you deserve better than what life has handed you lately." Eleanor hesitated. Every instinct told her to close the door, to retreat into the safety of her crumbling fortress, but something else spoke louder. Perhaps it was loneliness. Perhaps it was hope. She stepped back and opened the door wider. "Please," she said, "come in." Marcus entered the house carefully, acutely aware of how his presence might intimidate this fragile woman. He removed his bandana as a sign of respect, revealing a head that had long since surrendered to baldness. He looked around the living room, taking in the photographs, the plaque above the fireplace, the visible signs of decay that Eleanor had tried to hide with doilies and furniture arrangements. "Mrs. Mitchell," Marcus began, sitting down on the edge of a worn armchair when she gestured for him to take a seat. 42 years you taught at Cedar Falls Elementary. 3 generations of children learned to read in your classroom, learned to believe in themselves because you believed in them first. You gave everything to this community, and now it is time for this community to give something back. Eleanor's eyes were filling with tears she did not want to shed in front of a stranger. "How do you know about me? Who told you about my house?" "It does not matter who told us. What matters is that we are here now, and we are not leaving until your home is safe and sound. Outside, I have 30 men and women ready to work. Carpenters, electricians, plumbers, roofers. We have got all the materials we need, and we have got all the time in the world. This is what we do, Mrs. Mitchell. We take care of our own. And whether you knew it or not, you have always been one of us." Eleanor shook her head slowly, overwhelmed. "I cannot accept this. I cannot pay you anything. I do not even know you." Marcus leaned forward, his massive hands folded in front of him. "You do not owe us anything. Not a penny, not an explanation, not even a thank you if you do not feel like giving one. We are doing this because it is right. Because when good people fall on hard times, it is up to the rest of us to catch them. That is the code we live by. You spent your life catching children who were falling. Now it is your turn to be caught." The tears were flowing freely now, and Eleanor made no effort to stop them. She had spent so many years being strong, holding herself together with nothing but willpower and routine. To have someone offer help without conditions, without expectations, was almost more than she could process. "I do not know what to say," she whispered. "You do not have to say anything," Marcus replied gently. "Just sit back and let us take care of you for a change. We will try to keep the noise down, but there is going to be some banging and sawing today. Might be a good day to sit on the back porch if it is not too cold. One of my guys makes a mean hot chocolate if you want some." Outside, the work had already begun. Danny was directing teams to different areas of the house, his military training evident in the efficiency of his commands. Thomas Little Bear was examining the porch supports, determining what could be salvaged and what needed to be replaced entirely. Carlos was crawling under the house with a flashlight, assessing the plumbing situation. Jake had opened the electrical panel and was shaking his head at what he found inside. The neighbors were starting to emerge from their houses, drawn by the noise and the spectacle. Mrs. Patterson stood on her lawn with her arms crossed, watching with a mix of confusion and suspicion. Other neighbors gathered in small groups, whispering among themselves. Who were these bikers? What were they doing at Eleanor's house? Should someone call the police? But as the morning wore on, the nature of the work became impossible to misunderstand. These were not vandals or criminals. They were builders. They were fixers. They were turning a house that had been slowly dying into something that looked almost new. By noon, the old shingles had been stripped from the roof, and fresh plywood was being laid down. The porch supports had been replaced, and the sagging boards were being pulled up and exchanged for new lumber that gleamed pale and clean against the old weathered wood. Inside, Carlos and his team had fixed the leaking pipes in the bathroom and were working on the kitchen faucet that had dripped for so long Eleanor could not remember when it had started. Eleanor sat in her back garden on a lawn chair that one of the bikers had brought for her, wrapped in a blanket that another had produced from seemingly nowhere. A cup of hot chocolate warmed her hands, and she watched in amazement as man after man came to introduce himself, to shake her hand, to thank her for letting them help. If you watched this far, it is because something in this story touched your heart. Leave a comment saying, "A teacher changed my life." Share your own memory of a teacher who believed in you when nobody else did. Your words might inspire someone who needs to hear them today. Each introduction brought a story. Danny told her about his daughter, who was now in college studying education because she wanted to be a teacher like the ones who had inspired her. Carlos talked about his mother, a Mexican immigrant who had worked 2 jobs so he could stay in school, and how teachers had been the difference between him dropping out and him joining the military and finding his purpose. Thomas said little, but he pressed a small wooden carving into her hand, a delicate bird in flight, and said simply, "This is for the gift you gave this town." Eleanor did not understand. She had not given this town anything except her time and her effort. But as the day wore on and the house began to transform around her, she started to realize that time and effort, when given with love, were the most valuable gifts anyone could offer. By evening, the roof was half finished, the plumbing was completely repaired, and the porch looked like it belonged on a different house entirely. Marcus found Eleanor asleep in her lawn chair, the hot chocolate grown cold in her hands, and he gently woke her to bring her inside. "We will be back tomorrow," he said, "and every day after, until the job is done. You just rest now, Mrs. Mitchell. We have got this." As Eleanor lay in her bed that night, listening to the silence where the dripping faucet used to be, she realized she had not felt this safe in years, maybe decades. She did not know who these men were or why they had chosen her, but for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe she had not been forgotten after all. Maybe she had simply been waiting for the right people to remember. The second week brought sunshine and progress. The roof was now complete, sealed tight against the coming winter with shingles that matched the original color Eleanor and Harold had chosen 40 years ago. The exterior walls had been scraped, primed, and painted, restoring the house to a dignity it had lost somewhere along the way. Inside, new fixtures gleamed in the bathroom, the kitchen cabinets had been reinforced, and the electrical system was up to code for the first time in probably 30 years. But more than the physical repairs, something else was happening. Word had spread through Cedar Falls about what the Thunder Brotherhood was doing on Maple Street. At first, the community watched from a distance, suspicious of these leather-clad strangers descending on their quiet neighborhood. But suspicion slowly gave way to curiosity, and curiosity to admiration. On the third Saturday, Mrs. Patterson crossed the street with a casserole dish in her hands. She looked nervous, uncertain how to approach these intimidating figures working on her neighbor's house. Carlos met her at the edge of the property, his prosthetic leg visible below his shorts. "I thought the workers might be hungry," Mrs. Patterson said, thrusting the dish toward him. "It is my grandmother's recipe. Chicken and noodles." Carlos took the dish with both hands and smiled warmly. "That is very kind of you. The crew will appreciate it, and Mrs. Mitchell will probably want to know her neighbor was thinking of her." Mrs. Patterson's face colored slightly. "I should have come by sooner. I should have noticed she needed help. I just got so caught up in my own life, I suppose." "We all did." "That is the thing about getting caught up," Carlos said gently. "We do not realize we are doing it until we stop, but you stopped today. That counts for something." By the end of that week, more neighbors had come forward. Mr. Henderson, who lived 4 houses down, showed up with his toolbox and spent an afternoon helping Jake install new light fixtures. The Martinez family brought breakfast burritos that became an instant hit with the crew. The Johnsons, whose children Eleanor had taught 20 years ago, arrived with a truckload of furniture they had been keeping in storage, good pieces that were far newer than anything Eleanor owned. The community that had forgotten Eleanor Mitchell was beginning to remember, and as they remembered, they began to realize how much they had lost by looking away. During the 3rd week, a local news crew showed up at Maple Street. Someone had tipped them off, and a young reporter named Amanda Chen stood on the sidewalk with a microphone, trying to make sense of the scene in front of her. Bikers crawling on a roof, veterans painting trim, an elderly woman sitting in a rocking chair on a brand new porch, watching it all with tears streaming down her face. Marcus initially refused the interview. The Thunder Brotherhood did not do what they did for recognition. They did it because it was right. But Amanda persisted, and eventually, it was Eleanor who convinced him. "Let people see this," Eleanor said, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "Let them see that goodness still exists. The world needs to know." So Marcus stood in front of the camera, his leather vest and tattoos in sharp contrast to his gentle words. 42 years this woman gave to this community, Marcus said. She taught children to read, to add, to believe in themselves. She bought school supplies with her own money, stayed late to help students who were struggling, visited sick kids at home. And when she got old and needed help, the system forgot about her. We are just here to remind people that our elders are not disposable. They built the world we live in, and it is our sacred duty to take care of them when they cannot take care of themselves. Amanda asked him what motivated the Thunder Brotherhood to take on projects like this. "Every single one of us has a story about a teacher who changed our lives," Marcus replied. "For me, it was Mrs. Harrison, 5th grade. I was an angry kid, getting into fights, heading nowhere good. She saw something in me that I could not see in myself. She stayed after school every day for a year, helping me with my reading, talking to me about my future. If not for her, I would probably be dead or in prison. I cannot repay Mrs. Harrison because she passed away 15 years ago, but I can pay it forward. That is what we are doing here. Paying forward what we owe to every teacher who ever believed in a kid when nobody else did." The news segment aired that evening and went viral overnight. Social media exploded with stories of teachers who had changed lives, of elderly educators living in poverty, of communities that had forgotten the people who had shaped them. Donations began pouring into the Thunder Brotherhood, money they redirected toward a fund for other aging teachers in need. Other motorcycle clubs across the country reached out, wanting to start similar programs in their own communities. But for Eleanor, none of that mattered as much as what was happening right in front of her. On the 4th Saturday, Marcus knocked on her door with an unusual expression on his face. Something between nervousness and excitement, emotions that seemed out of place on a man of his stature. "Mrs. Mitchell, there is someone here to see you." Eleanor stood slowly from her new recliner, a gift from the Johnsons, and made her way to the door. Marcus stepped aside, and Eleanor saw a woman standing on her porch. She was in her mid-50s, with graying brown hair and tears already streaming down her face. "Do you remember me?" the woman asked, her voice choked with emotion. "I was in your class in 1978. Kimberly Wright. Kimberly Morrison now. I could barely read when I came to you. Everyone said I would never catch up, but you refused to give up on me." Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth as recognition dawned. Kimberly, little Kimberly with the learning disability that everyone said could not be overcome. She remembered the hours after school, the flashcards, the patience required to find the right approach for this particular child's unique mind. "You became a nurse," Eleanor whispered. "Samuel told me." Kimberly nodded, wiping her eyes. "I run the pediatric ward at the hospital now. I have saved a lot of lives over the years. But every single one of those lives, they trace back to you. To those hours you spent with me when everyone else had written me off." She stepped forward and embraced Eleanor, two women separated by decades but connected by moments that had shaped the course of a life. Eleanor held her former student and wept, feeling something she had not felt in years. Purpose. Meaning. The knowledge that her life had mattered. But Kimberly was not the only one. Over the following days, more former students arrived at Maple Street. Some came from across town, others from across the country. They brought photographs from old yearbooks, thank you cards they had received from Eleanor 30 years ago, and kept all this time, memories of moments that Eleanor herself had forgotten, but that had lodged themselves permanently in the hearts of children who had grown into adults who had never stopped being grateful. There was Michael Chen, who had come from Los Angeles. He was now a successful author, and he told Eleanor that she was the one who had first encouraged him to write, who had told him that his stories mattered. There was Sarah Johnson, who had become a social worker after Eleanor had noticed signs of trouble at home and had intervened to get her the help she needed. There was David Williams, now a congressman, who credited Eleanor with teaching him that education was the path out of poverty and into public service. Story after story, life after life. A tapestry of human connections that Eleanor had woven over 42 years without ever realizing the full picture of what she had created. Marcus watched these reunions from a distance, his own eyes wet with tears he did not bother to hide. He understood now why this mission had felt so important, why it had stirred something deep in every member of the club. They were not just fixing a house, they were honoring a legacy. They were proving that the ripples of kindness extended far beyond what anyone could see. One evening, as the sun set over a house that looked nothing like the ruin it had been a month ago, Eleanor sat on her new porch with Marcus and several members of the club. The work was nearly done, just final touches and landscaping remaining, but none of them wanted to leave. "I still do not understand," Eleanor said softly, looking at Marcus with the question that had been in her eyes since the first day. "Why did you choose me? Out of everyone who needs help, why me?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a photograph, yellowed with age but carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve. He handed it to Eleanor. She took it with trembling hands and held it up to the fading light. It was a class photo from Cedar Falls Elementary, circa 1972. Rows of children in their school clothes, smiling at the camera. And there, in the front row, a skinny boy with a defiant expression and bruises on his arms that the photographer had not quite been able to hide. "Front row, third from the left," Marcus said. "That was me." Eleanor stared at the photograph, and the years fell away. She remembered this class, remembered this boy, remembered the parent-teacher conference where she had confronted his father about the injuries, the days she had spent advocating for the family to receive services, the afternoon she had sat with Marcus in her classroom and told him that he was worth something, that his future did not have to look like his present. "Marcus," she whispered. "Little Marcus Thompson." "You saved my life, Mrs. Mitchell," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. "I was going down a dark path, and you pulled me back. You made me believe I could be something other than what I was born into. Everything I have done since then, every life I have touched, every veteran I have helped, every child I have protected, it all started with you. You planted a seed in a broken little boy, and it grew into something you could not have imagined. Eleanor could not speak. The tears flowed freely, and she did not try to stop them. All those years, all those students, and she had never known what happened to most of them. She had simply done her job day after day, hoping that some of it would stick, that some of it would matter. And now here was the proof, sitting on her porch in a leather vest, surrounded by brothers who had rebuilt her home and her hope. "You did not just save my life," Marcus continued. "You saved every life I have gone on to touch. That is the power of a good teacher. The ripples never stop. And I have been waiting 50 years to tell you that." Eleanor reached out and took Marcus's weathered hand in her own. The contrast was stark, his massive scarred fingers engulfing her delicate age-spotted skin. But in that moment, they were not a biker president and a retired teacher. They were two people connected by an invisible thread that had stretched across decades, waiting for this moment to be revealed. "Thank you," Eleanor said. "Not for the house, not for the repairs. Thank you for coming back and letting me know that it meant something. That is all a teacher ever wants to know." "It meant everything," Marcus replied. "And now, it is your turn to know that you meant everything to us." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of gratitude and closure, and the quiet recognition that some debts can never be fully repaid, only honored through lives well lived. The last day of construction arrived on a Saturday morning in late October. The trees on Maple Street had turned gold and crimson, and the air was crisp with the promise of winter. But Eleanor Mitchell's house no longer feared the coming cold. It stood transformed, a testament to what a community could accomplish when it chose to remember instead of forget. The Thunder Brotherhood had gathered for one final time at the property. The work was done, but none of them seemed ready to leave. They milled about on the new lawn that Thomas Little Bear had personally seeded and tended, admiring the fresh paint, the solid roof, the porch that no longer sagged or creaked. Some of them were taking photographs. Others were simply standing quietly, absorbing the moment. Eleanor emerged from her front door, moving with a sprightness that had not been there a month ago. She was dressed in her best outfit, a blue dress she had not worn since Harold's funeral, because she wanted to look worthy of this day. She made her way down the porch steps, her hand steady on the new railing Jake had installed, and stood before the assembled group with tears already forming in her eyes. "I do not know how to thank you," she began, her voice carrying across the lawn. "I have been a teacher my whole life, and for the first time I cannot find the right words. What you have done for me, it is not just about the house. You gave me my dignity back. You reminded me that I matter, and at my age, that is a gift more precious than gold." Marcus stepped forward from the group, holding something in his hands. It was a leather-bound book, handmade and beautiful. "We made this for you," he said, pressing it into her hands. "Every member of the club who worked on your house, they all wrote something. And we reached out to as many of your former students as we could find. There are letters in here from people all over the country, people whose lives you changed, people who never forgot you, even if life carried them in different directions." Eleanor opened the book with trembling fingers. Page after page was filled with handwritten letters, photographs, drawings. Kimberly Wright Morrison had contributed a letter telling the story of her career and thanking Eleanor for making it possible. Michael Chen had written about the book he had dedicated to her, even though she had never known it existed. Congressman David Williams had included an official proclamation from his office honoring Eleanor Mitchell for her service to education. There were letters from nurses and doctors, teachers and engineers, artists and scientists, all of them tracing their success back to a classroom in Cedar Falls Elementary and a woman who had refused to let any child fall through the cracks. "This is too much," Eleanor whispered. "I never expected anything like this." "You never expected anything at all," Marcus said gently. "That is what made you special. You gave without expecting to receive. But the universe has a way of balancing the scales, Mrs. Mitchell. And today, the universe is paying you back for every late night, every bought lunch, every kind word to a struggling child." Samuel Wright, the oldest member of the club, stepped forward. In his hands was a small wooden box. He opened it to reveal a pendant on a chain, a simple silver charm in the shape of an apple. "This is from all of us," Samuel said. "We know it is a symbol, but we wanted you to have something you could wear. Something to remind you every day that you are part of this family now. You are not just our teacher, Mrs. Mitchell. You are our elder, and we protect our elders." Eleanor accepted the pendant and held it close to her heart. The emotion in the air was so thick it seemed to shimmer, connecting everyone present in a web of shared feeling. These hardened bikers, these tough men who had seen war and loss and every kind of hardship, were openly weeping as they watched an old woman receive the recognition she had earned over a lifetime of service. A car pulled up to the curb, and everyone turned to look. The door opened, and a woman in her 50s stepped out, looking uncertain and out of place among the leather and chrome. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. "Sarah?" Sarah Mitchell Davis, Eleanor's daughter, the one who had moved to California and rarely called, stood on the sidewalk with tears streaming down her face. She had seen the news coverage. She had read about what the Thunder Brotherhood was doing for her mother. And for the first time in years, she had booked a flight and come home. "Mom," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "I am so sorry. I should have been here. I should have noticed you needed help. I got so wrapped up in my own life I forgot where I came from. I forgot who made me who I am." Mother and daughter embraced on the lawn as the bikers respectfully stepped back, giving them space for a reunion that was long overdue. They held each other for a long time, decades of distance dissolving in the warmth of the embrace. Marcus watched with a satisfaction that went beyond the physical work they had accomplished. This was the real repair, not the roof or the plumbing or the paint. The real repair was the healing of connections that had frayed over time, the restoration of family, the reminder that love, even when it has been neglected, can be rekindled if someone is willing to strike the spark. Later that afternoon, the Thunder Brotherhood held an informal ceremony in Eleanor's backyard. They presented her with an honorary membership in the club, a leather vest in her size with patches that read Teacher of the Year and Guardian of Children. Eleanor laughed as she put it on over her blue dress, the incongruity somehow perfect. "We expect to see you at meetings," Marcus said with a grin. "First Thursday of every month. And next summer, you are riding with us in the charity parade." "I do not think I can ride a motorcycle," Eleanor protested, still laughing. "Who said you have to drive?" Samuel replied. "You ride with me. My granddaughter bought me a sidecar last year. Plenty of room for both of us." The laughter continued, but beneath it was something deeper. A sense of belonging that Eleanor had not felt since Harold was alive, a family she had not known she had, forged not by blood but by the shared belief that kindness should be repaid in kind. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the bikers began to mount their motorcycles for the ride home. But before they left, they lined up on Maple Street, engines rumbling, and gave Eleanor a salute. Then, one by one, they rode past her house, each rider giving a wave or a nod as they passed. Eleanor stood on her new porch, wrapped in her honorary leather vest, waving back at each one. And when the last motorcycle had disappeared around the corner and the street had fallen quiet again, she remained there, looking out at the neighborhood that had finally remembered her. Mrs. Patterson waved from across the street. Mr. Henderson was walking his dog, and he stopped to call out a greeting. The Martinez children ran across her lawn, and she did not mind at all. She was home. Truly home, in a way she had not been for years. And somewhere on the highway, a convoy of motorcycles carried a simple message in their wake. A message about teachers and students, about giving and receiving, about the way a single act of kindness in a classroom can echo through generations until it comes back, transformed, to the person who started it all. The house on Maple Street was no longer a symbol of neglect and decay. It was a monument to what communities can accomplish when they choose love over indifference. And Eleanor Mitchell, the woman who had spent her life teaching children to believe in themselves, had finally learned to believe that the world believed in her. 5 months later, on a warm spring afternoon, the students of Cedar Falls Elementary School gathered in the gymnasium for a special assembly. Principal Margaret Torres stood at the podium, waiting for the children to settle into their seats before she began. "Today, we have a very special guest," Principal Torres announced. She was a teacher at this school for 42 years. She taught your parents and in some cases your grandparents. She dedicated her life to making sure every child who walked through these doors received the best education possible. And recently, she became famous around the world for a very different reason. Please welcome Mrs. Eleanor Mitchell. The doors at the back of the gymnasium opened, and Eleanor walked in. She moved slowly but steadily, her hand resting on the arm of Marcus Thompson, who wore his leather vest and walked beside her like an honor guard. Behind them came the rest of the Thunder Brotherhood, a procession of leather and chrome that made the children's eyes grow wide with wonder. Eleanor made her way to the podium, her eyes scanning the rows of young faces looking up at her. She remembered so many days like this, so many years of standing before children and trying to help them understand the world. But this was different. This was not about lessons or tests or homework. This was about something far more important. "Thank you for having me," Eleanor began, her voice amplified by the microphone, but still carrying the warm, patient tone that had comforted countless children over the decades. "I know I look old to you, and I am old, but I remember very clearly what it was like to be your age, to wonder if you mattered, to wonder if anyone noticed when you tried your best, to wonder if the hard work would ever pay off." She paused, looking out at the sea of young faces. "I want to tell you a story," she continued. "When I was a young teacher just starting out, I had a student who was very angry. He did not trust adults, and he did not believe that school could help him. He had a difficult life at home, and he thought his future was already written. But I saw something in him that he could not see in himself. I saw potential. I saw strength. I saw a person worth believing in." The children listened intently. Even the youngest ones seemed to sense that something important was being shared. "I spent a year working with that student," Eleanor said. "I stayed after school. I listened to him when no one else would. I told him every single day that he mattered, that his life was valuable, that his future was not determined by his circumstances, but by his choices." She turned to look at Marcus, who stood at the side of the stage with his brothers. "That student is standing right there," Eleanor said, pointing to Marcus. "He is 63 years old now. He served his country in Vietnam. He became the president of a motorcycle club that helps veterans and children and anyone else who needs protection. And when he found out that I needed help, he gathered his brothers, and they rebuilt my house with their own hands. They reminded me that I was not forgotten." The gymnasium was utterly silent. Teachers along the walls were wiping their eyes. Even some of the children seemed to understand the weight of what they were witnessing. "I am telling you this story," Eleanor continued, "because I want you to understand something very important. You matter. Every single one of you. You might be struggling right now. You might think that no one sees you, that no one cares. But I promise you, there are people watching. There are people who believe in you even when you cannot believe in yourself. And one day, if you let them, those people can change your life." She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of all her years pressing against her chest. "I spent 42 years in classrooms like this one. I taught thousands of children. I did not know if any of it made a difference. Most of the time, teachers never find out. We plant seeds and hope they grow, but we do not always get to see the flowers. But standing here today, I know now that it mattered. Every late night mattered. Every kind word mattered. Every time I chose to see the best in a child instead of giving up on them, it mattered." She turned back to Marcus, and he walked to the podium to stand beside her. "Mrs. Mitchell saved my life," Marcus said into the microphone. "And in saving my life, she saved every life I have gone on to touch. That is the power of a teacher. That is the power of kindness. That is the power that every single one of you has right now in this room. You can choose to be kind. You can choose to see the best in the people around you. You can choose to be the person who makes a difference." The assembly continued with questions from the students and stories from the Thunder Brotherhood about their service work. But the message had already landed. It was in the eyes of the children, in the tears of the teachers, in the atmosphere of the gymnasium that had transformed from ordinary to sacred. After the assembly, Eleanor was surrounded by children who wanted to shake her hand, to give her drawings they had made, to tell her about their dreams. She spoke to each one individually, looking into their eyes, listening to their words, treating them as the important individuals they were. This was what she had always done. This was who she had always been. A teacher who saw children as people, not problems to be managed. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus found Eleanor sitting in a quiet corner of the library, holding a stack of drawings the children had given her. She looked up as he approached, and her smile was radiant. "Thank you," she said simply, "for all of this." "We did not do anything you did not earn," Marcus replied. "We just made sure people remembered." Eleanor looked down at the drawings in her lap. Children's interpretations of motorcycles and houses and hearts, stick figures holding hands, suns shining in corners of pages, the pure, unfiltered optimism of youth captured in crayon and marker. "I think I understand now," she said slowly. "Why you came. Why it mattered so much. Tell me," Marcus said, sitting down beside her. "It was not just about fixing my house," Eleanor said. "It was about completing a circle. You came back to show me that the love I gave did not disappear, that it grew and multiplied and touched lives I will never know about. And in showing me that, you gave me the greatest gift a teacher can receive. You gave me proof that it mattered." Marcus nodded, his eyes glistening. "It is the same gift you gave me 50 years ago. You gave me proof that I mattered when no one else believed it. Now we are even." Eleanor laughed, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than humor. "We are not even. We never will be. But that is okay. That is how love works. It does not keep score. It just keeps flowing." They sat together in the quiet library, surrounded by books and dreams and the echoes of generations of children who had learned and grown and gone out into the world to become who they were meant to be. And in that moment, everything felt complete. Outside, the spring sun shone on Cedar Falls. The Thunder Brotherhood waited in the parking lot, their motorcycles gleaming. Sarah, who had moved back to town to be closer to her mother, was chatting with some of the teachers. Mrs. Patterson and the other neighbors had organized a welcome home party for later that evening. The town that had forgotten Eleanor Mitchell had remembered her with a vengeance, and the love was still pouring in. But for Eleanor, none of that mattered as much as what she felt in her heart at this moment. She was home. She was loved. And she knew, finally and completely, that her life had meant something. She stood up from her chair, tucked the drawings under her arm, and walked out of the library with Marcus at her side. The sun hit her face as she stepped outside, and she closed her eyes for a moment, feeling its warmth. "Ready to go home?" Marcus asked. "Home," Eleanor repeated, and the word had never sounded sweeter. If you watched this far, it is because you liked this story. Leave a comment saying, "I watched this far." That way, I can get to know you and know who really likes the stories on this channel. And remember to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe if you have not already. Every time you engage with our content, you help us reach more people who need to know that kindness still exists in this world, that good people still look out for each other, that teachers are heroes who deserve to be honored. This is a story about a biker gang that showed up to repair an old teacher's house. But really, it is a story about all of us. It is about what happens when we choose to remember instead of forget, when we choose to help instead of look away, when we choose to be the kind of person who makes a difference. Eleanor Mitchell spent 42 years planting seeds in the hearts of children. And on a cold morning in Cedar Falls, Iowa, those seeds came back to her as a forest of love, a forest of leather-clad warriors who never forgot the woman who had believed in them when no one else would. Sometimes the people who change the world do not make the news. They grade papers late at night and buy school supplies with their own money. They see the best in broken children and refuse to give up on them. They are teachers, and they are the unsung heroes of every generation. If you know a teacher who changed your life, reach out to them today. Send them a letter. Make a phone call. Let them know that what they did mattered. Because every teacher deserves to know that the love they gave is still growing, still flowering, still changing the world one life at a time. This is the story of how a biker gang brought an old teacher to tears. But it is also your story. and mine, and everyone who has ever been touched by a teacher's kindness. Thank you for being part of this community. Thank you for watching until the end, and thank you for believing with us that hope still has a heartbeat. Until next time, ride safe, live kind, remember the teachers.